Hey y'all. Okay, welcome to day 3 of our World War I unit. Today we are going to go to war. The United States is going to get involved. Some people are going to leave the war, and we're going to wrap the war up all in one time. So let's just jump right on in, okay? All right, so today we go to war. At the beginning of World War I, the U.S. was not getting involved. President Woodrow Wilson, declared that the U.S. would remain neutral during the war because the issues that were going on, these were strictly a European affair. It was strictly a European affair. We were going to stay out. We managed to stay neutral by supplying both sides, the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente, with supplies like food, raw materials, and weapons. Now, Great Britain has a long history of trade blockades, and they used their powerful navy to block off ports so trading couldn't occur. And this is exactly what happened in World War I. By 1915, German imports had gone down by 55%, so that means not as many goods and materials were coming into the country. Now remember, the U.S. remained neutral by trading and supplying both sides, okay? But when the blockade occurred, the United States had no choice but to join. But then to trade with the Allies, they could only trade with the Allies. Now, Germany reacted by intensifying submarine warfare. Okay, and so they had been going into the North Sea and into the Atlantic Ocean, and they were using submarines to bomb ships that had contraband or illegal items, specifically war supplies that were being shipped from neutral nations to an enemy nation. So in response to the blockade, Germany had declared that they would begin to use their submarines to sink without any sort of warning any ship that was found in the waters around Great Britain. And on May 7th, 1915, the Lusitania, which was a British passenger ship, it was sunk off the coast of Ireland by a German U-boat. There were 1,200 passengers that died, including 128 American citizens, okay? Now, Germany never apologized for this, of course. In fact, they claimed that the Lusitania was carrying ammunition, which later on it was found out that, yes, it actually was carrying ammunition. Americans were outraged, to say the least. After all, we were still a neutral country, and now American lives have been lost. So Wilson sent a very strong protest to Germany, and after 2 more attacks, Germany finally agreed to stop torpedoing neutral and passenger ships that were in the North Sea and the Atlantic. Now, Germany was desperate for an advantage over the Allies, and in 1917, they decided to return to submarine warfare. As if sinking 4 more American merchant ships and pushing America closer to war weren't enough, there was then the issue of the Zimmermann Telegraph. So in February of 1917, Germany's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Zimmermann, he sent a telegram to Mexican officials stating that Germany would help Mexico reconquer the land that they had lost to the United States if Mexico would become allies with Germany. Well, the U.S. managed to intercept and decode this telegraph, and on April 5th, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany in order to make the world safe for democracy. You have got to know that phrase. You must know that he said this, and he's referring to keeping the world safe for democracy, that we can't let people trample it, okay? So, of course, Congress approved his request, and the U.S. entered the war. Now, immediately, the U.S. began shipping supplies to Great Britain. So U.S. troops arrived in massive numbers in 1918 in Europe. This is a photo of American troops arriving in England. So now the major allies consisted of Great Britain, France, Italy, Canada, and the United States. And you can see that there are some allies down in South America, of course, Australia, much of Africa, as well as China, India, Japan, some of those countries as well. But the main ones were Great Britain, France, Italy, Canada, and the U.S. But in 1917, the Bolshevik revolutionaries in Russia, they overthrew Tsar Nicholas. And we're going to discuss this in much more depth in our next unit. But remember the Battle of Tannenberg? Well, the Russians had taken a massive blow to their army when they were defeated. So this is where 90,000 of their men were taken prisoner. So Russia had this massive revolution going on at home back in Russia. They had suffered major losses during World War I, and it was due to their lack of industrialization, not having enough food, as well as poor leadership that results in them ending up having to leave the war. So Vladimir Lenin, after Tsar Nicholas was overthrown, Vladimir Lenin, he took control of Russia. Okay, and we are certainly going to talk more about him later. But in March of 1918, the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, oh goodness, Litovsk, always say that wrong. This treaty, Russia accepts extremely harsh terms from Germany in order to get out of the war. So Russia ended up losing a quarter of their land. And you can see in the diagram there, the area in the red, Germany gains that land in the east, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire gains that red land to the east too, okay? Now, after the treaty was signed and Russia left the war, Germany pulled all of their troops that had been fighting on the Eastern Front over to the Western Front. And once again, Germany had Paris in its sights. Because remember that if you conquer a country's capital city, then you can control the entire country. So Germany made it all the way back to the Marne River again, but a counterattack by the Allies managed to push them all the way back to the German border. So after this setback, of course, German morale is low. Their troops are tired. They aren't advancing as quickly or easily as they had hoped. But Allied troops, though, they have high morale because not only are they fending off the Germans, but they also have fresh American troops that are coming in and replacing them every single month. Okay, now in your notes, you have a small little timeline to complete, okay? The Central Powers begin to see that things are just not going the way that they wanted them to, and so they start to fall apart. On September 30th, on September 30th, 1918, Bulgaria, they surrendered. 1 month later, on October 30th, 1918, the Turks from the Ottoman Empire, they asked for peace. And just days later, on November 4th, 1918, the Austro-Hungarian Empire broke up and stopped fighting in order to form their own independent governments. So of the Triple Entente powers, Germany was the only one left. Now eventually, because remember, morale is low, they've been losing, German soldiers begin to mutiny or retaliate against the government and refuse to fight. Kaiser Wilhelm was forced to abdicate or give up the throne. And on November 11th, 1918, Germany signed an armistice. Now, this is known as Armistice Day. So if you have a paper calendar somewhere in your house, take a look at November 11th. You'll see that it is typically still printed as being Armistice Day on calendars. So now what? Well, the Paris Peace Conference was held in Paris in January of 1919. There were 32 nations that sent delegates to go figure out what now. Russia and Germany did not send delegates. You know, Russia had their own issues going on at home, and quite honestly, nobody really wanted Germany there at the peace conference. They were the ones who caused all these big problems to begin with. But there were 4 major players, though, and they were called the Big Four, okay? They were David Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Great Britain, Vittorio Orlando, Prime Minister of Italy, Georges Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France, and Woodrow Wilson, who was the President of the United States. Now, Wilson had this fantastic plan that he thought was an ideal peace plan, and he called it 14 points. Here are just a few points from his plan. There could be no secret treaties. There must be freedom of the seas. Self-determination had to be a thing. So people had to be able to decide for themselves which government they wanted to live under. And finally, there should be a League of Nations. Now, this League of Nations, it was a general association of nations that would protect great and small alike, nations alike. And this really showed Wilson's hope for a way to peacefully negotiate solutions to world conflicts in the future. That World War I would be the last war of its kind, which is why it is often referred to as the war to end all wars. Although while we know that this sounds incredibly wonderful, with our 2020 hindsight, we can see that it just doesn't work out that way. So the differences the Big Four had with each other finally led to the Treaty of Versailles. So we're going to look at these 3 items from the Treaty of Versailles: the punishment of Germany, mandates, and the League of Nations. Okay. So there's Wilson. He was all about his 14-point plan. Okay. All right. So the Treaty of Versailles had been between Germany and the Allied powers, it was signed between Germany and the Allied powers on June 28th, 1919. Now, this is exactly 5 years from the day that started that spark, okay, that spark that started the whole war, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. Germany had to do several things. First, they had to accept responsibility for the war. They also had to pay reparations. What they paid was 132 billion gold marks. Okay, now marks are their form of money, okay, their currency. But that translates to about $33 billion US dollars. And that was to cover civilian damages that had been caused during the war. Germany finally paid off this amount on October 3rd, 2010. Okay, now remember that area, Alsace and Lorraine, that we talked about? Yep, Germany lost that territory again. It goes back to France. So it's been French, then it was German, then it was French again, and it was German. So remember, it goes back and forth a lot. Germany lost their military strength. It was restricted. They were told they could not have such a large military anymore. They lost land to reestablish Poland, and finally, they had to set up a demilitarized zone along the border of France and Belgium. Now, a mandate system was also set up, okay? Mandates are kind of like it's like a protectorate system. So France now controlled Syria and Lebanon. Great Britain controlled Iraq, Transjordan, and Palestine. Okay, now I briefly talked about the League of Nations earlier. It was President Woodrow Wilson's grand idea, but overall, the League of Nations was extremely weak, and because it had no power to enforce the decisions made, because of this weakness, Congress would not approve it, and therefore the United States was not a member of the League of Nations. So by the end of World War I, we see the end of the Ottoman Empire, we see the end of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the end of the German Empire, and the Russian Empire. And in their places, if you look at the map on the right, we see new countries have formed, including Austria, Hungary, Poland, Yugoslavia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Now, we'll do a map next class of post-World War I Europe. But what did the war truly cost? 9 million lives. 21 million were wounded, and monetarily speaking, $338 billion. Okay? All right. So that wraps up World War I. Your test review is going to be posted online either tonight or tomorrow. You'll need to make sure you have that completed before your test, which is either Monday or Tuesday if you were an A day or a B day. It depends. B days will test first on Monday. A days are on Tuesday.